The morning of August 14th started, like any other Tuesday, in our quiet suburban neighborhood. I remember standing in our kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows, preparing breakfast, while my daughter Emma hummed softly from her wheelchair on our front porch. At 17, Emma had spent most of her life in that chair, her cerebral palsy having stolen her ability to walk, but never her radiant spirit. She loved watching the birds at our feeder, counting the cardinals and blue jays with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything in her life. "Mom, there's a purple finch," she called out, her voice filled with that pure joy that made even the darkest days bearable. I smiled, whisking eggs and planning to join her once breakfast was ready. Our front porch had become Emma's sanctuary, a place where she could feel the breeze, watch the world go by, and exercise the small measure of independence her condition allowed. I should have known something was wrong when I heard Sharon Patterson's voice rising above the morning calm. Sharon, our HOA president, had made our lives increasingly difficult over the past 6 months. It started with a citation about our wheelchair ramp being aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Then came complaints about Emma's therapy equipment being visible through our windows. Each week brought a new violation notice, a new demand, a new threat of fines. But this morning was different. Through the window, I could see Sharon marching up our driveway, her face contorted with rage, waving what looked like another citation. Emma was turning her wheelchair around, clearly startled by the aggressive approach. I dropped the whisk and headed for the door, my heart already beginning to race with the familiar dread that had become synonymous with Sharon's visits. "This is unacceptable," Sharon was shouting as I pushed open the screen door. "I've told you people repeatedly this medical equipment cannot be stored on the porch. It's a violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws." The medical equipment she was referring to was Emma's backup wheelchair, which our insurance required us to keep readily accessible. Our garage was full, and keeping it on our covered porch, our private property, seemed the most practical solution. But Sharon had made it her personal mission to enforce every rule, every technicality, with an almost pathological fervor. "Sharon, we've been over this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. "Emma needs that chair accessible. Our doctor provided documentation." "I don't care what your doctor says," Sharon interrupted, her face flushing red. "Rules are rules. Everyone else manages to follow them. Why do you people think you're so special?" Emma's hands trembled on her wheelchair's armrests. She hated confrontation, and Sharon's aggressive tone was clearly frightening her. I moved protectively closer to my daughter, placing myself between them. "We're not trying to be special," I said, my voice firm now. "We're trying to accommodate my daughter's disability. The Fair Housing Act. Don't you dare lecture me about the law." Sharon's hand went to her purse, and in that moment, time seemed to slow down. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. The metallic glint in the morning sun. The way her fingers wrapped around something small and dark. "Sharon, what are you?" I started to say. The gunshot shattered the morning like breaking glass. Emma's scream, high-pitched, terrified, agonized, will haunt me until my dying day. I watched my daughter's body jerk backward in her wheelchair, her hands flying to her shoulder where blood began to blossom across her yellow t-shirt like a horrible flower opening its petals. "Emma!" I lunged forward, catching her wheelchair before it could tip backward off the porch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on. Blood. There was so much blood. It was soaking through her shirt, running down her arm, dripping onto the porch we'd painted together just last spring. "Call 911. I screamed at Sharon, at the neighbors who were beginning to emerge from their houses, at anyone who could hear. "Someone call 911. But Sharon wasn't calling for help. She was backing away, the gun still in her hand, her face pale with shock. "She threatened me," Sharon said, her voice strange and distant. "She was threatening me. I had to defend myself." "Threatened her?" Emma couldn't even stand up. Emma, who cried when she accidentally stepped on bugs with her wheelchair. Emma, who apologized to inanimate objects when she bumped into them. My sweet, gentle daughter who had never raised her voice in anger in her entire life. You shot her. I sobbed, pressing my hands against Emma's shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding while also trying to hold her, comfort her, tell her everything would be okay. You shot my baby. Emma's eyes were wide with shock and pain, tears streaming down her face. Mom, she whimpered. Mom, it hurts. It hurts so much. I know, sweetheart. I know. Help is coming. Just hold on. Please hold on. Neighbors were running toward us now. Mr. Chun from next door was on his phone with emergency services. Mrs. Rodriguez brought towels, pressing them into my hands. But Sharon just stood there, still backing away, still holding that gun, still muttering about self-defense and threats and rules. The paramedics arrived in what felt like both seconds and hours. They worked quickly, efficiently, loading Emma onto a stretcher while I held her hand and whispered promises I didn't know if I could keep. You're going to be okay. You're so strong. I love you so much. As they lifted her into the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of Sharon, now surrounded by police officers still clutching her purse, still claiming she'd been defending herself against my disabled daughter. That was the moment I realized we weren't just fighting for Emma's recovery. We were going to have to fight for justice too. The emergency room became our world for the next 18 hours. Fluorescent lights that never dimmed, the constant beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell that made my stomach turn, and the waiting. God, the endless waiting. I sat in a plastic chair outside the operating room, Emma's blood still staining my hands and clothes, replaying those terrible seconds over and over in my mind. My husband, Marcus, arrived within the hour, his face gray with fear and disbelief. He'd been at work when I called, and the 40-minute drive from downtown must have been torture. When he saw me, covered in our daughter's blood, shaking uncontrollably, he simply pulled me into his arms, and we stood there, holding each other up, both of us too terrified to speak the fears that were consuming us. How is she? He finally managed to ask. Still in surgery, I whispered. The bullet hit her shoulder. They said there might be nerve damage. She could lose function in her arm. Marcus? She could. My voice broke and I couldn't continue. Marcus held me tighter. She's strong. Our Emma is so strong. The surgeon, Dr. Patel, emerged 3 hours later, still in his scrubs, exhaustion evident in his eyes. The surgery went as well as could be expected, he said in those words. As well as could be expected felt simultaneously like a lifeline and a death sentence. We removed the bullet and repaired the damage to her shoulder. There was trauma to the brachial plexus, the network of nerves that controls arm movement. It's too early to know the full extent of the damage. But she'll be okay? Marcus asked, his voice desperate. She'll recover? Dr. Patel's pause said everything we didn't want to hear. She'll live. Beyond that, we'll need time to assess. The next 48 hours are critical for infection prevention. Long term, she's looking at extensive physical therapy. The nerve damage, it could be temporary or it could be permanent. I'm sorry I can't give you more definitive answers right now. After he left, Marcus and I held each other in that sterile hallway and cried. Our daughter, who already faced so many challenges, who had already overcome so much, now had to fight through this too. It wasn't fair. It would never be fair. They let us see her once she was moved to recovery. Emma looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes, her shoulder heavily bandaged, her face pale against the white pillow. But her eyes were open, and when she saw us, she tried to smile. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad, she whispered, her voice weak but present. I rushed to her side, careful not to jostle her, and took her good hand in mine. Oh, baby, how are you feeling? Tired, she said, and it hurts, but I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. Her courage shattered me. Even now, even after being shot on her own porch for no reason, Emma was trying to comfort us. Marcus kissed her forehead, his tears falling onto her hair. You scared us, sweetheart. I'm sorry, she whispered, because that was who Emma was, apologizing even when she was the victim. Don't you dare apologize, I said fiercely. None of this is your fault. None of it. Over the next hours, as Emma drifted in and out of sleep, the full picture of what had happened began to emerge. The police had arrested Sharon at the scene. Multiple neighbors had witnessed the shooting. Mr. Chun had recorded part of the confrontation on his phone. The evidence against Sharon was overwhelming. But then came the phone call from Detective Morrison. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his tone professional but tinged with something that sounded like apology. "I wanted to inform you that Sharon Patterson has been released on bail. She's claiming self-defense, and her lawyer has filed motions asserting that she feared for her safety. Self-defense. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She shot my disabled daughter, who was sitting in a wheelchair. How is that self-defense? I understand your frustration, Mrs. Parker. I really do. But Ms. Patterson's attorney is arguing that your daughter made threatening gestures, that Ms. Patterson felt endangered. My daughter can barely lift her arms above her shoulders." My voice was rising, drawing concerned looks from passing nurses. "She has cerebral palsy. She can't walk, she can barely stand even with assistance, and Sharon shot her while she was sitting in her wheelchair on our own porch. I know, and I believe you. But the legal system, it's complicated. She has the right to present her defense, and the prosecutors will need time to build the case. I'm calling because I wanted you to know before you saw it on the news or heard it from someone else." After he hung up, I stood in the hospital hallway, phone still in my hand, trying to process this new nightmare. Sharon was free. She'd shot my daughter, and she was free, probably sleeping in her own bed, while Emma was here, connected to machines, facing months of painful recovery and an uncertain future. Marcus found me there, standing frozen. "What's wrong? What happened?" When I told him, I watched my gentle husband's face transform with an anger I'd rarely seen. "She's out. She shot our daughter, and she's out. They set bail at $50,000, I said numbly. "Her lawyer is claiming self-defense. This is insane. This is absolutely insane." Marcus paced the hallway, running his hands through his hair. "We need a lawyer. We need the best lawyer we can find." He was right, of course. But as we sat there in the hospital, our daughter fighting for recovery in the next room, I realized we were facing battles on multiple fronts. Emma's physical recovery, the criminal case against Sharon, probably a civil lawsuit, the medical bills that were already accumulating. And somehow, we had to stay strong for Emma through all of it. That night, sleeping in shifts in uncomfortable chairs beside Emma's bed, I made a silent vow. Sharon Patterson had taken so much from us already, our sense of safety, our daughter's health, our peace of mind, but she wouldn't take our hope. She wouldn't take our fight. We would see this through, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Because Emma deserved justice. And because every other family with a disabled child deserved to know that they could live in their homes, on their porches, in their communities, without fear of violence from those who saw their children's needs as inconveniences rather than as the basic human accommodations they were. The days blurred together in a haze of hospital rooms, doctor consultations, and physical therapy sessions that left Emma crying from pain and frustration. What the initial surgery had revealed was worse than we'd hoped. The bullet had severed several nerves in Emma's shoulder, and the damage to her brachial plexus was extensive. Her right arm, which had limited mobility before due to her cerebral palsy, now hung mostly useless at her side. "I can't feel my fingers anymore," Emma told me one afternoon, tears streaming down her face as she stared at her unresponsive hand. "Mom, what if I never get it back?" I had no answer that wouldn't be a lie. The neurologist had been cautiously pessimistic. Nerve regeneration, if it happened at all, would take months or even years. There was a real possibility that Emma would permanently lose function in her dominant hand, the hand she used to paint, to write, to navigate her wheelchair's controls, to do everything that gave her independence and joy. The occupational therapist, a kind woman named Valerie, tried to remain upbeat. "We'll adapt," she said gently during one of Emma's sessions. "If the nerve damage is permanent, we can look at specialized equipment, modified controls for your wheelchair adaptive devices." But I could see the defeat in Emma's eyes. She'd spent 17 years adapting to a world that wasn't designed for her. She'd learned to navigate stairs she couldn't climb, reached for things on shelves she couldn't access, endured stares and whispers and the constant exhaustion of having to work 3 times as hard as everyone else for the same results. And she'd done it with grace and humor and resilience that amazed me every single day. But this was different. This wasn't a condition she was born with, something she'd learned to live with from infancy. This was violence. This was loss. This was someone choosing to hurt her, and the randomness of it, the preventability of it, made the grief so much worse. I used to think the hardest thing about having CP was not being able to do things other kids could do. Emma confided to me late one night, when the pain medication wasn't quite enough to let her sleep. But at least that was just biology. Bad luck. This is different. Someone chose to do this to me, Mom. Sharon chose to bring a gun to our house and shoot me. How do I process that? I climbed carefully into the hospital bed beside her, holding her close the way I had when she was small. I don't know, baby. I'm so angry I can barely breathe sometimes, but we're going to get through this. Somehow, we're going to get through this. The medical bills were staggering. Our insurance covered most of the emergency surgery and hospital stay, but there were countless uncovered expenses, specialized physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological counseling that Emma desperately needed, modifications to our home to accommodate her additional disabilities. Marcus worked overtime constantly, and I picked up extra freelance work. But we were drowning financially, and through it all, the legal case dragged on with agonizing slowness. Sharon's high-priced defense attorney filed motion after motion, delaying the trial, requesting continuances, building what they clearly intended to be a comprehensive self-defense case. They subpoenaed our HOA records, looking for any instance where we'd been difficult or non-compliant. They requested Emma's complete medical history, as if her cerebral palsy somehow justified being shot. Our attorney, Margaret Chin, was a fierce advocate, but even she seemed frustrated by the tactics. They're trying to paint Emma as threatening, she explained during one meeting at our kitchen table. Papers spread everywhere. Sharon's team is going to argue that your daughter's disability made her movements unpredictable, that Sharon felt endangered by what she perceived as aggressive gestures. Aggressive gestures? Marcus nearly shouted. She was turning her wheelchair around. She was trying to get away from Sharon. I know, and we have Mr. Chen's video showing exactly that. But they're going to try. They're going to try everything. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for October, 2 months after the shooting. Emma insisted on attending, despite her pain and despite our protests. I need to be there, she said firmly. I need to face her. The morning of the hearing, I helped Emma dress in a simple blue dress, careful of her injured shoulder, which was still heavily bandaged. As I helped her into her wheelchair, she needed help now, where before she'd been able to transfer herself. I saw her looking at her reflection in the mirror. I look different, she said quietly. You look beautiful, I said, though I knew that wasn't what she meant. She looked thinner, paler, the trauma written in the shadows under her eyes and the way she held herself. The shooting had aged my daughter, stolen some essential lightness from her. The courthouse was overwhelming, cameras, reporters shouting questions, courthouse security. Sharon was already inside with her legal team, and when we entered the courtroom, I saw her for the first time since the shooting. She looked composed, professional in a dark suit, nothing like the rage-filled woman who had stood on our porch with a gun. When Sharon's eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw no remorse. No guilt, just a cold calculation that made my blood run cold. The hearing itself was brief, just a procedural necessity to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. But listening to Sharon's attorney describe the shooting was surreal and horrifying. In their version, Sharon was the victim, a concerned neighbor trying to enforce reasonable community standards, suddenly confronted by an agitated individual making threatening movements. My client feared for her life, the attorney said smoothly. She made a split-second decision to protect herself from what she reasonably perceived as an imminent threat. I looked at Emma, sitting in her wheelchair beside our attorney's table, tears sliding silently down her face as she listened to herself being characterized as a threat. My gentle, kind daughter who wouldn't hurt a fly. The judge, a severe-looking woman named Judge Rodriguez, seemed unmoved by the defense's arguments. After hearing from both sides and reviewing the evidence, including Mr. Chen's devastating video, she ruled that there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Ms. Patterson, Judge Rodriguez said, looking directly at Sharon, you will stand trial on charges of assault with a deadly weapon and aggravated battery. Trial is set for January 15th. Bail conditions remain in effect. This hearing is adjourned. As we left the courthouse, Emma was quiet. She'd been expecting victory, vindication, immediate justice. Instead, she got more waiting, more uncertainty, another 3 months before the trial would even begin. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, something I hadn't done in years, but which had become necessary again, she asked me the question I'd been dreading. Mom, what if the jury believes her? What if they decide I was threatening and she goes free? I wanted to promise her that wouldn't happen. I wanted to guarantee justice, to swear that the truth would prevail. But I'd learned too much about the legal system in the past 2 months to make promises I couldn't keep. Then we appeal, I said finally, and we appeal again. And we tell our story to anyone who will listen. Because what happened to you is wrong, Emma. Undeniably, absolutely wrong. And we won't stop fighting until everyone knows it. Word of the shooting spread through our neighborhood like wildfire, and in the aftermath, our once quiet community became a battleground. I naively thought that the facts of the case would be enough, that everyone would see the obvious injustice of a disabled teenager being shot on her own porch and rally to our side. I was wrong. Sharon Patterson had lived in our neighborhood for 15 years. She'd organized block parties, maintained a community garden, and served as HOA president for the past 5 years. She had friends, allies, and people who simply couldn't reconcile the woman they knew with the woman who had shot Emma. The first sign of trouble came when Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down crossed the street to avoid speaking to me at the mailbox. Then came the neighborhood Facebook group posts, initially sympathetic, but soon evolving into something darker. There are 2 sides to every story. One post read, maybe we should wait for all the facts before we rush to judgment. Sharon has served this community for years. Another person commented, she deserves the benefit of the doubt. And then, most painfully, those people never did follow the rules, always wanting special treatment. Those people, as if we were foreigners in a land we'd lived in for 8 years. As if having a disabled child made us outsiders, troublemakers, less deserving of basic human dignity. A petition began circulating, not calling for Sharon's resignation from the HOA, but requesting that we drop the charges for the good of the community. 63 people signed it, including families we'd considered friends, parents whose children had played with Emma, neighbors we'd helped during hurricanes, whose mail we'd collected when they traveled, with whom we'd shared countless casual conversations over the years. The petition was delivered to our house by Tom Morrison, a neighbor who served on the HOA board with Sharon. He stood on our porch, the same porch where Emma had been shot, and handed me the printed pages with an expression that managed to be both apologetic and condemning. We think it would be best for everyone if this could be resolved privately, he said. Sharon made a mistake, but destroying her life won't undo what happened. Emma is recovering, and Sharon is willing to pay medical expenses. Get off my property, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Get off my porch right now. Mrs. Parker, I'm trying to help. Help. I stepped forward, and Tom instinctively stepped back. You think money makes this okay? You think we should just let the woman who shot our daughter walk free, because it's convenient for the HOA? That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. Now leave, and tell everyone who signed this, I waved the petition in his face, that they can go to hell. After he left, I stood on the porch shaking, the petition crumpled in my fist. 63 signatures. 63 people who thought preserving neighborhood harmony was more important than justice for a shot teenager. But for every person who turned against us, others stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Chun became our fiercest advocates, attending every hearing, speaking to anyone who would listen about what they'd witnessed. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a meal train, ensuring we had food during the worst of Emma's recovery. A local disability rights group reached out, offering support and connecting us with resources. And then there were the people we'd never met, strangers who heard our story and were outraged on our behalf. Letters of support arrived from across the country. A GoFundMe campaign, started by someone in the disability community, raised over $40,000 for Emma's medical expenses. People we'd never heard of sent cards and gifts and messages of encouragement. "You are not alone," one letter read. "What happened to Emma is everyone's fight. We're with you." Emma herself became something of an inadvertent activist. A local news station interviewed her, and the clip went viral. My daughter, sitting in her wheelchair, her arm in a sling, speaking with quiet dignity about what it meant to be disabled in a world that too often saw disability as an inconvenience rather than a reality deserving of accommodation and respect. "I didn't ask to be born with cerebral palsy," Emma said to the camera, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But I deserve to exist in the world anyway. I deserve to sit on my own porch without being shot." That shouldn't be a controversial statement. The interview changed things. Suddenly, our story wasn't just local news. It was a national conversation about disability rights, about HOA overreach, about gun violence, about who gets to feel safe in their own homes. Reporters camped outside our house. Talk shows called. Advocacy groups wanted Emma to speak at their events. It was overwhelming and exhausting and often intrusive. But it also meant that Sharon couldn't control the narrative. Her attorneys tried to keep the case quiet, to handle everything behind closed doors, to settle discreetly, and make the whole thing disappear. But Emma's courage made that impossible. The HOA held an emergency meeting in November to discuss Sharon's status as president. Marcus and I attended, along with 24 supporters and an equal number of Sharon's defenders. The meeting room was tense, divided down the middle like opposing armies. Sharon's supporters argued that she deserved due process, that removing her before a verdict was unfair, that her years of service to the community should count for something. Our supporters argued that keeping someone who shot a disabled teenager in a position of authority was unconscionable, that the HOA's reputation was already damaged beyond repair, that leadership required accountability. The vote was close, 13-11, but ultimately Sharon was asked to resign. She refused. It took another vote, another contentious meeting, and finally a lawsuit from several homeowners before she was formally removed from her position. Even then, she remained in the neighborhood, living in her house 2 streets over, a constant reminder of that terrible morning. Emma couldn't go outside without the risk of seeing her, couldn't play in our yard or sit on our porch without fear. Our home, which had always been Emma's safe haven, had become a source of anxiety. "I hate that she did this to us," Emma confessed one evening. "I hate that she took away the one place I felt completely safe. I can't even enjoy our porch anymore, Mom. Every time I go out there, I remember what happened. I remember the gun. I remember the pain. I remember thinking I was going to die. We considered moving, but that felt like letting Sharon win. This was our home. Emma had friends here, real friends, who had supported her throughout this nightmare. We had our lives, our routines, our community of allies. Why should we be the ones to leave? Instead, we installed security cameras. We changed our daily patterns. We made sure Emma was never outside alone. We adapted, once again, to a reality we'd never asked for but had to navigate anyway. The neighborhood would never be the same. The shooting had revealed fault lines that had always been there, but which we'd managed to ignore. Some people, when faced with the choice between convenience and justice, chose convenience. They chose their comfort over our daughter's safety. They chose silence over solidarity. But others, the Chens, the Rodriguezes, the Patels, and so many more, chose differently. They chose courage. They chose to stand with us, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost them friendships and social standing in the community. Those were the people who reminded us why we stayed. Those were the people who showed us that for all the darkness the shooting had revealed, there was light too, the light of human kindness, of moral courage, of people willing to do the right thing, even when it was hard. As we approached the trial date, our neighborhood remained divided, but we were not alone, and that made all the difference. January arrived with bitter cold and the weight of accumulated dread. The trial of Sharon Patterson was set to begin on January 15th, and as the date approached, our anxiety grew almost unbearable. Everything we'd endured for the past 5 months, the pain, the medical procedures, the financial stress, the community division, was leading to this moment. The prosecution's case was led by Assistant District Attorney James Wilson, a methodical man in his 50s who had spent weeks preparing Emma for her testimony. "Just tell the truth," he kept saying. "Tell them exactly what happened in your own words. That's all you need to do." But Emma was terrified. The night before the trial began, she had a panic attack, so severe we almost called an ambulance. She couldn't breathe, couldn't stop shaking, kept repeating, "I can't do this, I can't face her, I can't." Marcus and I held her, talked her through it, reminded her of her strength. "You've already survived the worst part," I whispered. "You survived being shot. Everything else is just telling people about it. And you're so good at telling your truth, Emma. You've been doing it your whole life." The courtroom was packed that first morning. News crews filled the hallway outside, restrained by courthouse security. The judge had allowed cameras in the courtroom, and I knew that meant Emma's testimony would be broadcast across the country. My daughter, who just wanted to live her life, quietly, was about to become the face of disability rights and gun violence prevention, whether she wanted to or not. Sharon sat at the defense table looking calm and professional, her expensive suit perfectly pressed, her hair styled immaculately. She'd hired Robert Harrison, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state, a man known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to create reasonable doubt out of thin air. Jury selection had taken 3 days. Wilson was looking for people who could see Emma as a human being rather than a disability. Harrison was looking for people who could sympathize with Sharon's fears, who might understand the split-second decision she'd had to make. In the end, they seated 12 jurors and 2 alternates, a diverse group that gave me cautious hope. The opening statements set the tone for everything that followed. Wilson was straightforward and emotional. The evidence will show that on the morning of August 14th, Sharon Patterson brought a loaded gun to the home of the Parker family and shot their 17-year-old daughter Emma while she sat defenseless in her wheelchair on her own front porch. There was no justification. There was no threat. There was only rage at a family that dared to accommodate their disabled daughter's needs. Harrison's opening was insidious in its reasonableness. "This is a tragedy," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "No one disputes that. A young woman was injured, and that's terrible. But this case isn't about whether Emma Parker was hurt. It's about whether Sharon Patterson acted reasonably in a moment of fear. The evidence will show that Sharon did not set out that morning to hurt anyone. She went to address a legitimate HOA violation, and when she was confronted with aggressive, unpredictable movements, she reacted the way any person might react when they feel their life is in danger." I wanted to scream. Aggressive movements? Emma had been turning her wheelchair around, trying to get away. But Harrison was good at his job. He was already planting seeds of doubt, already reframing the narrative. The prosecution's case unfolded over 6 days. They presented the video footage from Mr. Chen's phone, devastating evidence that showed Sharon approaching aggressively, Emma trying to retreat, and then the shooting. They called Mr. Chen to the stand, and he testified clearly and emotionally about what he'd witnessed. There was no threat, Mr. Chen said firmly. Emma was scared. She was trying to get away. And then Sharon pulled out a gun and shot her. I'll remember her scream for the rest of my life. They called the paramedics who responded, the ER doctors who treated Emma, the specialists who explained the extent of her injuries. They built a comprehensive picture of a violent, unjustified attack on a vulnerable teenager. And then it was Emma's turn to testify. The courtroom fell silent as I wheeled Emma to the witness stand. The judge had made accommodations, Emma could testify from her wheelchair rather than having to transfer to the witness chair. Wilson approached her gently, his voice kind. Emma, can you tell the jury what happened on the morning of August 14th? Emma's hands trembled in her lap, but her voice was steady. I was sitting on our porch, watching the birds at our feeder. I do that most mornings. It's one of my favorite things. She paused, glancing at Sharon, then quickly away. I heard shouting. Mrs. Patterson was coming up our driveway. She was angry about my spare wheelchair being on the porch. What did you do when you saw her approaching? I started to turn my chair around to get my mom. I was scared. Mrs. Patterson had been mean to us before, sending us all these citations and complaints, and she seemed really angry that morning. And then what happened? Emma's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She pulled out a gun. I didn't understand at first what I was seeing. And then she shot me. A tear rolled down Emma's cheek. It felt like being hit by lightning. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying. Did you do anything to threaten Mrs. Patterson? No. Emma's voice was firm now, despite her tears. I was sitting in my wheelchair. I can't even stand up on my own. I was just trying to get away from her. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Emma's perception, her memory, her characterization of events. He asked invasive questions about her disability, about her limitations, about whether her cerebral palsy affected her judgment or her ability to control her movements. Isn't it true that your condition causes involuntary muscle spasms? Harrison asked. Sometimes, but... So, it's possible that you made a sudden, unexpected movement that could have been perceived as threatening? I was turning my wheelchair around. Emma said, her voice rising with frustration. How is that threatening? I'm asking if you can be certain that your movements were calm and non-threatening, given your condition. Wilson objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Harrison was planting the idea that Emma's disability itself made her threatening, that her very existence as a disabled person justified Sharon's fear. When Emma finally left the stand, she was shaking and exhausted. I wheeled her out of the courtroom and into a private room where she broke down completely, sobbing into my shoulder. He made it sound like it was my fault, she cried. Like being disabled makes me dangerous. No, baby. No. The jury saw through that. They saw you. They heard you. You did so well. The defense presented their case over the next 4 days. They called character witnesses who testified to Sharon's years of community service, her dedication to neighborhood standards, her fear of confrontation. They brought in an expert on self-defense who explained how split-second decisions work, how fear can override rational thinking, how reasonable people can make mistakes under pressure. And then Sharon herself took the stand. She was a compelling witness, composed, articulate, careful with her words. She expressed regret for Emma's injuries, but insisted she'd had no choice. I was terrified, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Emma was making these sudden movements, and I didn't know what she was going to do. I'd heard stories about people with disabilities becoming violent when agitated. I thought she might have a weapon. I thought she was going to hurt me. It was a masterful performance, and I could see some of the jurors nodding sympathetically. Sharon was painting herself as the victim. A woman simply trying to do her job, confronted by an unpredictable situation, forced to make an impossible choice. Wilson's cross-examination was withering. Ms. Patterson, you testified that you feared Emma Parker. Is that correct? Yes. Emma Parker, who weighs 98 pounds and uses a wheelchair. You feared her. Yes. Even though you outweigh her by at least 50 pounds, and you have full mobility, it wasn't about size. You brought a gun to a confrontation with a disabled teenager. Why? Sharon hesitated. I carry a gun for protection. It's my right. Did you intend to use it when you went to the Parker home that morning? I didn't intend to use it, but I was prepared to defend myself if necessary. So, you anticipated violence when you went to confront a 17-year-old girl about a wheelchair on her porch? I didn't know what to anticipate. Wilson let the outburst hang in the air for a moment. Ms. Patterson, you've sent the Parker family over 30 HOA citations in the past year. Is that correct? If there were violations, 30 citations, for things like Emma's therapy equipment being visible through windows, their wheelchair ramp not matching neighborhood aesthetics, Emma's wheelchair being on the porch. Does that seem excessive to you? I was enforcing the rules. Or were you harassing this family because you didn't want a disabled person living in your neighborhood? Harrison objected loudly, and the judge sustained it, but again the point was made. The jury had seen Sharon's animosity, her obsessive focus on the Parker family, her willingness to bring violence to a situation that required only basic human decency. The closing arguments were emotional on both sides. Harrison painted Sharon as a victim of circumstance, a good person who made a tragic mistake in a moment of fear. Wilson painted her as a bully who escalated a minor dispute into violence because she valued rules more than human life. Emma Parker will live with the consequences of Sharon Patterson's fear for the rest of her life, Wilson said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. She has permanent nerve damage. She's lost function in her dominant arm. She has PTSD. She can't sit on her own porch without reliving the moment she was shot. And for what? Because her wheelchair was in the wrong place? Because Sharon Patterson decided that neighborhood aesthetics were worth more than a teenager's life. The jury deliberated for 14 hours over 2 days. Every minute felt like an eternity. Emma couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. We sat in the courthouse cafeteria, drinking bad coffee and refreshing news websites, waiting for word. When the call finally came that the jury had reached a verdict, we rushed back to the courtroom. Emma gripped my hand so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. Marcus put his arm around both of us. We stood together as the jury filed in, trying to read their faces, looking for any hint of what was coming. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. Emma's sob of relief echoed through the courtroom. I pulled her close, tears streaming down my face. Marcus was crying too, and for the first time in 5 months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. On the charge of aggravated battery, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. Sharon's face remained impassive, but her hands clenched on the table. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. In the gallery, I could hear some people crying, Sharon's supporters mourning the verdict. But I could also hear applause, quickly silenced by the judge from those who had stood with us. Sentencing was set for February. Sharon faced up to 15 years in prison. But in that moment, the specific sentence didn't matter as much as the verdict itself. 12 people had listened to the evidence, had looked at Emma and Sharon, had weighed the claims and counterclaims, and had decided that what happened on our porch that August morning was not self-defense. It was a crime. Justice, imperfect and incomplete as it always is, had been served. The weeks following the verdict brought a strange mixture of relief and grief. Sharon Patterson was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in prison, less than we'd hoped for, but more than her attorneys had argued for. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke directly to Sharon. You had choices that morning, Judge Rodriguez said. You chose to bring a gun. You chose to confront a disabled teenager on her own property. You chose to fire that weapon, and now you must face the consequences of those choices. But the Parker family will live with the consequences of your choices for far longer than 8 years. Emma Parker's injuries are permanent. The trauma you inflicted will last a lifetime. But the criminal trial was only one chapter in our journey toward healing. The civil lawsuit we filed against Sharon would take months more to resolve. The medical bills continued to accumulate, and Emma's physical and emotional recovery was an ongoing process that had no clear endpoint. 7 months after the shooting, Emma still had limited function in her right arm. The nerve damage had proven to be permanent, just as the neurologists had feared. She'd had to learn to do everything left-handed: writing, eating, navigating her wheelchair's controls. Every task that had been difficult before was now exponentially harder. But Emma was adapting. She always did. The occupational therapy sessions that had seemed so devastating at first gradually became empowering. Valerie, Emma's therapist, helped her discover adaptive technologies she'd never known existed. A modified wheelchair with controls she could operate with her left hand. Speech-to-text software that meant she didn't have to rely on handwriting for schoolwork. Specialized equipment that made daily tasks manageable again. I'm not the same person I was before, Emma told me one afternoon as we sat together on our porch. Yes, our porch, which we'd reclaimed through sheer force of will and the installation of security cameras. But I'm learning to be okay with that. I'm learning that being different doesn't mean being broken. The trauma, though, was harder to heal than the physical injuries. Emma had nightmares regularly. Loud noises made her flinch. She couldn't be around guns, even in movies or TV shows, without having panic attacks. Her therapist diagnosed her with PTSD, and we added regular counseling to the long list of medical appointments that structured our lives. But there were victories, too. Small ones at first, then larger. The day Emma laughed at something silly Marcus said, really laughed, not the careful, controlled responses she'd given for months. I cried with relief. The day she asked to go to the park with her friends, even though it meant being out in public, potentially vulnerable, I was terrified but so proud. The day she submitted her college applications, refusing to let the shooting derail her dreams. I knew she was going to be okay. The community, too, was healing, though the divisions remained. The HOA underwent significant reforms. 3 board members resigned in shame over their handling of the situation. The new leadership implemented policies prohibiting discrimination based on disability and requiring reasonable accommodations for residents with medical needs. They formally apologized to our family and dedicated a community garden in Emma's name. It wasn't enough. Words and gestures couldn't undo what had happened. But it was something. The GoFundMe campaign that had started in the aftermath of the shooting ultimately raised over $150,000. It covered Emma's medical expenses and allowed us to make modifications to our home that improved her quality of life. But more than that, it represented something profound. The power of community, of strangers deciding to care about a girl they'd never met, of people choosing solidarity over indifference. Emma used some of the money to start a small nonprofit called Safe at Home, dedicated to supporting families of disabled children who face discrimination and violence. She spoke at conferences, wrote blog posts, shared her story over and over again because she believed it might prevent someone else from experiencing what she had. If my pain can protect even one other disabled kid, she said, then maybe it means something. 1 year after the shooting, we held a small gathering on our front porch, the same porch where Emma had almost died. We invited the Chens, the Rodriguezes, the Patels, and all the others who had stood with us. We hung lights and played music and celebrated Emma's survival, her courage, her unbreakable spirit. Emma gave a short speech, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. A year ago, someone tried to take everything from me. My safety, my health, my future. But she didn't succeed. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still believing that the world can be better than it was that morning. We toasted to survival, to justice, to the long, difficult road toward healing. And as I looked at my daughter, scarred but unbroken, hurt but not destroyed, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for what we'd endured, but for what we discovered through enduring it. The depth of human courage, the power of community, the resilience of the human spirit. Emma would always carry the scars, physical and emotional, of what Sharon Patterson had done to her. There would always be a before and after, a line dividing her life into the time when she felt safe in her own home and the time when that safety was stolen from her. But she would also carry forward something else, the knowledge that she had faced the worst and survived. That she had stood up in a courtroom and told her truth, that she had transformed her trauma into activism, her pain into purpose. The shooting had taken so much from us, but it hadn't taken everything. We still had each other. We still had hope. We still had the determination to keep fighting for a world where disabled children can sit on their porches without fear, where difference is accommodated rather than punished, where basic human decency prevails over petty rules and prejudice. 8 years from now, Sharon Patterson would be released from prison. She would have served her time, paid her debt to society in the limited way the criminal justice system measures such things. What she would do with her freedom, whether she would ever truly understand the harm she caused, remained to be seen. But we wouldn't be waiting for her. We would be living our lives. Emma would be in college, pursuing her dreams, advocating for others. Marcus and I would be supporting her as we always had, adapting to whatever new challenges arose. The porch where she was shot would be just a porch again, reclaimed and repurposed as a space for family gatherings and birdwatching and all the ordinary joys of daily life. Sharon Patterson had tried to destroy us, but she had failed, and in our survival, in our resilience, in our refusal to be diminished by her violence, we had won something more important than any court verdict. We had won our lives back. Emma's story is not unique. Across this country, disabled people face violence, discrimination, and harassment simply for existing in spaces others deem inconvenient. They are removed from airplanes, denied access to public spaces, harassed in their own neighborhoods, and told their accommodations are special treatment rather than basic human rights. But we can change this. We must change this. Here's how you can help. Support disability rights organizations fighting for stronger protections and enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Donate, volunteer, or simply amplify their voices. Examine your own communities. Are HOAs, businesses, and public spaces truly accessible? If not, advocate loudly for change. Believe disabled people when they share their experiences. Listen without minimizing. Stand with them without speaking over them. If you witness discrimination against disabled individuals in your neighborhood, your workplace, anywhere, speak up. Silence is complicity. Most importantly, see disabled people as complete human beings deserving of dignity, respect, and the fundamental right to exist safely in the world. Emma survived because she's extraordinarily strong. But no one should have to be that strong just to live. Join the fight for a world where they don't have to be.